I would love to ask Gabriella to come on stage. Gabriella from South Africa, which is a bit younger democracy from 1994. Please, Gabriella, share your work at OpenUp and how you are contributing to democracy.
Thank you so much. Very happy to. Just to make sure that people can see my screen, it'll just help me focus. Perfect. Okay, hi everyone. I'll be introducing to you a little bit about how OpenUp digitally empowers democracy. But in order to tell you that story, I should first tell you this story, which is the story about how we founded it, just to explain a little bit about how we address these things with innovation. So in about 2012, my co-founder, Adi Yel, who was a data scientist, and myself, Gabriella Razzano, who was a transparency lawyer, met each other at an Open Knowledge Foundation meeting in Cape Town. And we had a shared love of data and a shared love of innovation and a shared love of all things South African. But both of us being him embedded in the data space and me embedded in the human rights and civil society space, what we saw was while there were these amazing advancements in data and innovation for addressing all kinds of needs in other spheres, and while there was this amazing, vibrant community of people working on democracy and advancing in democracy in South Africa, there was not an overlap between these two spheres of work. And so in order to try and, bring these two things together, Adi and I co-founded what is the first open data-driven social impact technology nonprofit in South Africa, OpenUp. But, just to understand the context in which OpenUp tries to work, South Africa is a country of significant social and income inequality and significantly high poverty rates, significantly high unemployment rates, in spite of, I think, very thriving democratic institutions, and like we said, a young democracy. And, you see a very low levels of participation by the public in formal institutions of democracy. So we have low national elections turnout, and low levels of trust and participation in Parliament. And those sort of formal institutions remain very alien to people. Importantly, too, it's not just that people don't trust these institutions. They also don't feel that they know and have enough information and know enough to be able to participate in these institutions. Although people do feel comfortable participating in local and community levels of engagement. And, when we think about what that means for trying to create a thriving South African democracy, we understand that this means we need to provide more data, relevant data and information that's more easily accessible so that people feel better informed. We need to help impart digital and innovation skills, but also try and create participation systems that are simple and efficient so that people feel empowered. And then in order to activate people into participating in democracy from both the government and the civil society side, we need to, help build trust in institutions, help build responsiveness in institutions, and help build accountability mechanisms. And so, a lot of our interventions try to meet all these different kinds of needs. But to move into the specifics of how we do things, this is our mission, but we've essentially created South Africa's open data infrastructure. If there's an open data project in South Africa, it's likely that OpenUp have been involved in some level. We've made available through a partnership with National Treasury, both national financial data in Vulekamali and municipal level financial data in Mooney Money. And there's several other open data driven projects that are listed there that you can have a look through to see how we've done that. And then we tend to also empower civil society groups through collaboration. This year, obviously, was a big election in South Africa, a great election in my feeling, because it was peaceful transition. to a really interesting coalition government, which we all call the NEW, or the GNU, or the Government of National Unity. Together with the South African National Editors Forum, OpenUp made, not only all the elections data available, but we put this on a tool that we call WASIMAP, which is our own GIS information tooling, and allows you to analyze all that elections data against relevant census data, relevant demographic data, even relevant information like police stations and point data, like you see here. And that was available to empower journalists. And we did that through, several kinds of training. So this isn't really about elections results. This is about creating a capacitated newsroom who really know how to report in detail on the realities of the elections, given our inequality context. Another project we have been doing this year was Civicus, is helping to co-create a financial and non-financial resource pool to empower sub-Saharan African digital democracy defenders. To do this, we've been, creating the structure to help, capacitate around 120 organizations within this ecosystem, which we should begin rolling out with them next year. So another thing that we do, in other words, is to provide data and innovation skills to people already active in the democracy field. A final project I thought I'd reflect on quickly is our own collaboration with Parliament. So all parliamentary information is made available through a civil society group called the Parliamentary Monitoring Group. And we've created the PMG's website with them, as well as their other website, People's Assembly, which tracks relevant parliamentary official information. And this is the key way that most researchers, most South Africans, and most MPs actually receive parliamentary information in South Africa. It's got over 4 million users in an average year. It's got over 200,000 open records. And to be honest, it's one of the few sources of openly available big data sets, actually, that we currently have. And we're doing lots of different exciting kinds of collaborations with PMG on using that data, providing new creative ways to empower South African citizens to participate in government directly through Parliament. So that's just a high-level introduction to some of the things we do. We obviously have quite a big portfolio of projects, if you can imagine, because we do that kind of facilitating role. And you can actually explore our impact catalog on that QR code if you want to have a look at some of our projects, or, I'm always available on email. So thank you.
Thank you, Gabriella. Also a very comprehensive and well-versed explanation of what OpenUp does and the impact that you're creating in South Africa. And I hear a lot open data being the key element for both Yeva and Monosemas and what you do at OpenUp. What about Gabriella?
Yeah.
What was your journey in pushing through with open data and actually getting the government on board with it or against it? But what's that element of the journey?
No, I mean, we've traditionally had a very collaborative relationship with government across spheres of government, so at national, provincial, and local government level. And I think it's for a couple of reasons, one of them being we're quite agnostic, and it's about delivering on a shared goal and making sure that those goals align, and aligning incentives with partners is a very important strategic element of doing it. But our open budget portal at municipal and local government is a direct partnership actually funded for by national government. And there are often different political incentives in play in making information transparent, and sometimes being strategic in thinking about whose needs can be met in these processes is important. And I mean, I think about something like Mooney Money, which is the municipal finance data portal, and that our API is accessed by some of the banks because the banks use it to to do credit risking on municipalities and local government for financing. So, there are direct incentives for municipalities to make the best information, best quality information available, because otherwise, they're just excluded from those kinds of systems as well. So, it's sometimes a complicated dance, but often, because we're a facilitator, it's often our partners who are, at the forefront of the political contestations. And there's still, in both civil society and government, quite a lack of data and digital capacity, that these partners are always very open to collaborating just to meet that need. And that's where we come in.
You mentioned incentives for institutions to kind of like also join and have these platforms. Do these incentives come from government direct, or it's more just the whole policy that is present in South Africa that now kind of like pushes through institutions, through incentive mechanisms to open data, to join the digital transparency platforms?
I mean, I'm going to give the lawyer's answer, which is it depends, it really depends on the project. But yeah, there are, so for instance, Mooney Money and Vulekamali very similarly have a part of the strategy for policy and creating policy incentives there. Those were both open government OGP projects, and that's been very useful as a kind of like incentive leverage, to drive those projects. But, sometimes, like, we've done a project with a local municipality on creating open business information. Because at the local level, surprisingly, I mean, it's something you wouldn't think was difficult to get access to, but like, up-to-date, consolidated information about local businesses is very difficult for them to centralize and generate. I mean, it sounds ridiculous. It's a Yellow Pages problem. I don't know if you guys know, back in the day, that's what the Yellow Pages was for. But in that situation, it's really interesting because the municipality is incentivized because we have a lot of policy frameworks around preferential procurement, providing, business to local, and the community is incentivized to participate in those data collection activities. It's actually a data collection project because they want to be visible, as a producer for these services. So yeah, aligning incentives is a strategic, it's a
systematic key component, right?
Yeah.
But Gabriella, I wanted to turn this question to you, because you mentioned in your presentation that the public participation by citizens is very low, but the community participation is pretty high. And on the other hand, you have open data frameworks, you have apparently institutions that are really incentivized to open up more data and be open and transparent. Maybe like for the end of it, I will ask all of you to share a couple words about like, what do you think is the next key milestone in your projects, achieving, even greater integration of government and transparency in the citizens. But Gabriella, you can maybe start by also just briefly telling about, like, what about that increasing public participation in South Africa? How is that happening? Is that happening? Where is it going?
Yeah, I mean, I'm forever hopeful because it's, there's always opportunity, to improve things. And, already we're about to launch a project because we, and lobbying, it's become a dirty word, but there are lots of ways that civil society, active members of communities can lobby their politicians very constructively for better conditions. And it's just that those spaces are, blocked out by, private interests and political interests, and there are lots of rooms to make those spaces more accessible for people, and digital tooling is one of them. So is very multi-stakeholder kinds of initiatives, which include bringing together like non-profit actors, but also private sector actors alongside governments. And we've got a couple of those kinds of multi-stakeholder initiatives, you know, in play in a couple of different spheres. So, you know, I think it's also, you know, it's a good year. It's a year that's just kicked off after a successful election, you know, to all accounts. So things are looking very good here. Don't know how everybody else feels.
That's always very positive and welcoming to. That is super motivating and pleasant to hear, because I think that all of your work really contributes. And of course, like underlying enabler is digital technology. We wouldn't be here today talking about open data and government transparency if it wasn't for digital technologies. That actually, like, even somehow today talking to you guys, I was thinking like, you know, I'm sitting in my room in Lithuania and I am getting a window into Nigeria, South Africa, and a completely different place in Lithuania, which is absolutely amazing, which bridges citizens, politicians, opens up possibilities for us to come together, to become more transparent and more inclusive in decision-making process. And the state of the world where we are right now, there is no other way. There is no other way for people to be aside. Then we have so much access to information, and for politicians to not be inclusive for this. So I really thank you a lot for joining us today, for doing the amazing work that you're doing, for winning WSA competition. And I really hope that I will meet you around in WSA events or just in different forums. And I also really hope that all of you will get connected and can share experiences and learn from each other as well. Just like we invite everybody on YouTube, all the WSA community or any other listener to get in touch. If you found something relevant, if you want to learn more, if you want to stay engaged, please do so. We're all about inclusivity and opening up the knowledge so that everybody can benefit. So without keeping you away from your evenings, all of us are in a very similar time zone, weirdly. I really want to thank you, and I hope I will see you again very soon. Thank you.
Thank you also.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.